We are pleased to have the Senior Advisor for the U.S. Agency of Global Media, Ms. Kari Lake, before us today. Your full statements will be made a part of the record, and I'll ask you to keep your spoken remarks to roughly 5 minutes in order to allow time for member questions. I now recognize you, Ms. Lake, for any opening statement that you may have.
Good morning, and thank you, Chairman Mast and Ranking Member Meeks and members of this House Foreign Affairs Committee. Thanks for having me. My name is Kari Lake. I'm the Trump Administration Senior Advisor to the U.S. Agency for Global Media. Before I get started, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to let you know this opening statement I'll be delivering is a shortened version of a longer version that I have submitted to you earlier and would love to be put into the congressional record. Last December, President-elect Donald Trump called me and asked if I would help reform U.S. Agency for Global Media and the Voice of America, and I said yes. I was honored and eager to help these institutions tell America's story to the world. But within days in my role as senior advisor, it became increasingly clear that reform was nearly impossible. The agency was incompetent and mismanaged and deeply corrupt, politically biased, and frankly, a serious threat to our national security. USAGM oversees VOA, Office of Cuba Broadcasting, and grantees like Radio Free Asia, Radio Free Europe, Middle East Broadcasting Network, Open Technology Fund, and Frontline Media Fund, all of which are 100% funded by the hardworking American people. Over the past 15 to 20 years, the agency has become a significant national security risk. They hire a shockingly high number of foreign nationals, and they conduct subpar security vetting, so bad that top intelligence agencies revoked this agency's ability to do even the most basic background checks. So many of USAGM's hires come from countries hostile to the United States. Over the decade from 2010 to 2020, Office of Personnel Management and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence repeatedly flagged severe security failures, but U.S. AGM leadership ignored them. They continued to grant journalists and technicians, many from foreign nations, high-level security access based on falsified documents and incomplete background checks, phony names, phony Social Security numbers. Even after corrective actions were taken in the final months of the Trump administration, these safeguards were reversed by the incoming Biden administration. The scale of the problem is staggering. During the first Trump administration, the political appointees led by CEO Michael Pack got to work fixing it. And they discovered that out of 150 people who were hired during that time period when they weren't doing appropriate vetting, 500 of them were still out there and they could not find them. They went back and re-vetted everybody, but 500 had gone missing. They could not be located for further screening. Foreign employees with Social Security numbers that are fake and fake names given top secret access now missing. That keeps me up at night. My team is working to track them down. Our new security director is working to try to turn this agency around and make it where it's safer. It's a vast problem that we've uncovered. We've also uncovered that the grantees like Radio Free Europe hired people later identified as foreign spies. At one point, they nearly hired more than 20 spies from a nation hostile to America. Those hires were stopped thanks to a timely tip, and I'm happy to give you more information on that in a secure setting. Voice of America has employed individuals with direct ties to hostile nations. They even once paid paid for somebody who worked previously in Russian media writing anti-American stories to come on the staff and continue to write anti-American stories. At one point, a serious security threat to America, an Office of Cuba Broadcasting Cuba, was declared to be a national security threat. He was fired, thankfully, but he worked there for quite some time. So how do they get so many foreign nationals in? Well, they abuse the J-1 visa program, which is a pathway to citizenship intended for exchange students and cultural exchanges, students, camp counselors, and au pairs. It's not intended for journalists, and it's created severe vulnerabilities, and frankly, it has displaced many, many American workers who could have filled these jobs. VOA also sidestepped their charter to be reliable, authoritative news, instead being riddled with political bias and outright anti-American sentiment. Examples, you mentioned it, Chairman, refusing to call Hamas terrorists, glamorizing Che Guevara, airing campaign-style videos favoring President Biden, even broadcasting a graphic depicting President Trump with a swastika over his face on their news. I wouldn't want that, by the way, even if it was President Biden. This is totally inappropriate. And a ridiculous editorial firewall prevents agency leadership like myself from correcting any of the bias or having any say in the editorial content that goes on the air. We've also got financial mismanagement, which I hope we'll go into. $75,000 spent for a COVID study on how Mac computers can be used for social distancing. $100,000 in American taxpayer money to actually sponsor an Afghan cricket team. $400,000 for quid pro quo payments to African VOA affiliates. And they actually wrote quid pro quo next to the budget item. $825,000 for a New York music show and $6 million contract for consulting advice that was never even implemented. I told these stories to people, and many times they say, wow, this place sounds like a crime scene. And I frankly have just learned that it is indeed a crime scene. We've learned that there is an active investigation going on at VOA for a series of threatening phone calls that have been coming out going after one of your colleagues, a sitting member of Congress, with years' worth of threatening phone calls. And they've discovered that those phone calls were coming from inside the Voice of America. This place is rotten. It's rotten to the core. President Trump has asked me to go in and help clean it up. And he's also issued an executive order to reduce this agency down to its mandate, to what is mandated, statutorily required. That's exactly what I'm doing. I don't care if they attack me. We're going to make it right for the American taxpayers. And with that, I'm happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you for that question, and thank you for laying out when it was a better agency. You're right. Ronald Reagan used it, a great broadcaster, one of the great communicators, and he used it. But times have changed, and it's still doing 1990s-style television in a world where people are getting their information right here on their smartphones. It's in the back pocket. And so we need to update it and modernize it. But President Trump's executive order dated March 14th has called for this agency to be brought to its statutory minimum. And I'm glad that you mentioned Iran, because one of the languages that is required in the statute is Farsi, and we are still broadcasting in Farsi. And Ranking Member Meeks said that we have not been, and that we, in a panic, started to put news out in Farsi. That is actually not true. We were in the process of effectuating President Trump's executive order, and in the process of doing that, several malicious lawsuits were started up, and the judge froze us from being able to get news on. We literally were frozen in place because of all of these lawsuits. Once we were freed to start putting news on, we immediately went to what the statutory minimum is, and one of the languages is Farsi going into Iran. And I'm very proud to say that when President Trump, when the bombings happened over the weekend on Saturday, and when President Trump started to speak, we had a crew in on Saturday delivering President Trump's message to the people of Iran in Farsi. It was translated and it went out. Sometimes a lean and mean and a smaller staff makes it easier to get things done. And in one of the emails that I got from our Persian team, they actually said that. They were able to move quicker because it was smaller, the bloat had been diminished. And I'm really proud of the fact that we got that on. We're going to continue to operate at the statutory minimum. We are putting out content in Pashto, Dari, Mandarin, Farsi, and Spanish through Office of Cuba Broadcasting. I've been working in media for 30 years, and in every newsroom across this country in that time.
Yes or no? Did you do?
These are complex questions. They're not yes or no questions.
It's either you did a review or you didn't.
We are right-sizing an agency that has grown and grown and grown.
Did you do a review?
We've reviewed. Yes, we've reviewed.
You've done a review. Do you have a record? Do you have a record of what you reviewed?
We have reviewed the number of employees, the number of languages, but most of all, what we reviewed was an executive order, March 14th, by the man who's in charge of the executive branch.
I want to know.
His name is Donald Trump.
Do you have a record that you can produce? The chairman said you had a bunch of things with you. Do you have a record of what you reviewed and who you reviewed to?
We reviewed the statute.
Do you have a record? Yes or no?
We have the statute, and
do you have a record?
The statute. Yeah, we can pull that statute for you.
If you have it, not the statute, the record of individuals that you reviewed, interviewed, or talked to before you committed your actions of dismantling.
I talked to a lot of people at the agency.
Do you have a record of that?
You could go back and look at emails.
Do you have a record?
Do you want me to pull emails?
I want you to show the record of what you did, Ms. Lake.
Well, you can
Don't
take a look at it.
Don't just give me something that's not verified. Tell me, show me the record, because that's what I hear oftentimes in the business. You have to have a record. Show me the record that you did what you did. That's all.
It's pretty obvious what we did.
Did you survey? Let me ask this question then. Did you survey employees that was there about waste, fraud, and abuse you believe was occurring at the agency? Did you survey?
We
Since you
know
said
that there's waste, fraud, and abuse.
Did you survey the employees? Yes or no?
Why?
Yes or no?
These are ridiculous
Did
questions.
you serve? Simple answers. You either did or you didn't.
Yeah, I guess survey means talk
Did
to
you
and
do
ask
it or not?
questions. Sure, we did.
You did? Then you can provide those surveys. You can show us a record of who you talked to.
We did not run an expensive survey, but I've talked to many people at the agency.
You didn't do.
I'd be happy to, and I just actually read an article that was very interesting. It's called Chinese Influence at Voice of America. And I mentioned that there's a firewall, an editorial firewall, that members of the management at USAGM and Voice of America cannot tell the reporters what to report. They can't talk about what should be in the newscast. And so if a reporter decides to go rogue and do pro-CCP coverage, I can't do anything about it. That's not how a newsroom should be run. I've worked in newsrooms my whole life. There's always some editorial control that management has so that you're making sure that what goes out of the airway is accurate. And frankly, in an agency such as this, it should be telling America's story. That's our charter, telling America's story, being authoritative, not telling China's story. But I want to talk to you a little bit about what you just mentioned. If I may read this, because it was really shocking when I read this. And sorry, I got to put my reading glasses on for this one, guys. Starting in the first decade of the 2000s, the Chinese embassy in Washington, D.C., and the leadership of VOA's Mandarin service began an annual meeting to allow embassy officials to voice their opinions about VOA's content. So management at USAGM has no say in what content it goes on, but the folks over at the CCP and the Chinese embassy do have say about what goes on our air. CCP embassy officials have also reached out to VOA hosts to convince them to be more supportive of the regime. VOA personalities have hosted events at the embassy. VOA TV editor, one of them, publicly pledged his allegiance to China at a Chinese embassy event. This is absurd. This is insane, and the American taxpayers are footing the bill for this. You know, they also ran a 2-minute CCP propaganda. They produced it at VOA. And the management agreed that it was CCP propaganda. Frankly, 2 seconds of CCP propaganda is too much. The American people are footing the bill. And so things have to change there. We need to make sure that firewall is gone. We should be able to have control over what kind of content goes out. It should be in alignment with our foreign policy. And unfortunately, the only people that seem to have any influence are our adversaries on what is going out on VOA's airwaves. It's outrageous, and it has to stop. And thankfully, President Trump issued that executive order to bring this agency down to its statutory minimum, and he has called for this agency to be eliminated starting in the fiscal year 2026. I agree. I think the safety and security of journalists is very important. I was a journalist in my past profession, and so it's critically important, and I don't think that they've done enough to protect them. I'm thankful that recently, in the last few days, one journalist who was being held was released thanks to President Trump. And, you know, I think you need to ask RFE, Radio Free Europe, what they're doing to protect their employees. I just got to the agency 3 months ago, and what the question is,
I would like to know,
why are we
Madam,
hiring,
if I may, reclaiming my
why
time.
are we
I'm
hiring
reclaiming
more
my time.
Americans? If they would drop their malicious lawsuit, I'd be happy to meet with them, but it would be really stupid to meet with someone who's suing you. And, you know, this is a gentleman who makes about $310,000, $320,000 off the backs of hardworking Americans and is suing our agency. We've given him all, well, I think it is difficult to meet with people when they're suing you. It just isn't advised. And if any attorney would tell you, you can't sit down and meet with somebody who's launched malicious lawsuits against the agency, naming me in those lawsuits. So it'd be ill-advised to do that, obviously. You know, we do not have a current grant agreement with RFE, Radio Free Europe, which was started, you know, many, many years ago as a CIA operation. And we don't have a current grant agreement with them. We've been asking to work with them negotiating a grant agreement, and they refuse. We offered a grant to them, and they refused to even mark it up and redline it and send it back to us. So we don't have an approved financial plan. They won't tell us where they're spending their money. We've got an audit going on right now, and they've stonewalled and prevented us from getting any access to their financial books. Again, we pay them, and they do not tell us where the money is going. I think that's a problem. I think the American people deserve to know where their money is going. And so we're working to make sure we get that. Interestingly, in the 11th hour last night, right before I crawled into bed, we found out that they're finally going to give a little bit of information to our auditors. I thought it was really interesting timing because they didn't want me to sit up here and say they refused to let us look at their books. They refused to let us see where the American taxpayer dollars are going and once it's getting funneled into RFERL. And if they really, we've paid them every month, by the way. So if they're not protecting their journalists, it's on them. If they're not putting out broadcasting, it's on them. We have paid them every month because the judge has ordered us to. And so it's on them if they're not putting out broadcasting.
Ms. Lake, this is...
I'm very familiar, and it's in one of these binders, and it was an incredible report looking at some of the mismanagement, misuse of funds, and other outrageous things that were happening at this agency.
To that end,
sadly, there hasn't been any accountability. That McGuire-Woods report was done in the waning days of President Trump's first term. Michael Pack was the CEO, and he helped make that possible. He saw, the first day on the job, he got dropped on his desk this issue with 1,500 employees had not been properly screened. And he said, this is a real big problem. ODNI was saying, you got a serious problem over there. You guys are freelancing on your security screenings, and you're allowing dangerous people into our country. And so they got busy investigating how this was happening. They put people on administrative leave, and before they could do anything and get and fire people, people had left that were being investigated. When the Trump administration ended and Biden went into office and replaced the leadership at this agency, they rehired all of those people back.
So let me,
and gave them
I don't mean to
settlements
cut
of
you off, Ms. Lake, but I gotta...
$650,000. They shouldn't believe it, and I think this is why President Trump wants to eliminate the agency. The agency itself is not needed. It's proven that it does not know how to manage and does not know how to be respectful of this country and the American taxpayers' dollars. And so I think President Trump is absolutely right in eliminating this agency. We can roll in things that are valuable, that are worthwhile, bring it under the Department of State, where it once was, by the way, Voice of America, back when it was effective, back when many of you talk about the glory days of Voice of America, it was under the Department of State, where there were guardrails on what the story of America was being told. It wasn't anti-American. It was in line with our foreign policy. And I think that's where it probably should end up. Yeah, we actually got to work after the 14th of March, and we put people on administrative leave and assessed what the statutory minimum was.
Can you provide us documentation of that so we can do our job as oversight?
I mean, in meetings and in discussions, we talked about
the minutes of those meetings and the documentation of that.
It would be emails and things of the such.
That's all stuff that we can take a look at as a committee as we do oversight. Again, I'm not...
Sure. Absolutely. It would be wonderful to work with you and to effectuate the President's executive order to reduce this agency down in size so that it's lean, mean, and effective. And I think it is effective. We were able to get information out into and translated into Farsi as to what was happening. We were able to get President Trump's address translated live as it was happening. You don't need a massive staff. This is the only newsroom in the world that hasn't seen cutbacks because we don't need to have massive newsrooms.
Again,
15,000 people.
Right now, what I worry about, though, is we've let go of all this staff, and it isn't happening, and it's only happening.
We haven't let go of all the staff, actually. By the way, can I just mention something? I want to show you the newsroom, one of the newsrooms over at VOA. I don't know if you can see this. Empty. It's kind of a Where's Waldo. Can you spot the one person in there?
Not from here.
One person in the newsroom. And I know you're probably saying, yeah, thanks a lot, Kari. No, this was actually back during the Biden administration. I didn't hear any complaints coming from anybody when nobody was showing up for work at VOA. When one person was showing up in the middle of the week, one person showed up. And nobody on this committee, no Democrat said, why is there only one person in that newsroom? We need to get more people in the newsroom to get the story out. Nobody was showing up for work. And now that we are actually right-sizing an agency that has been bloated out of control and has never been right-sized, even though newsrooms all across this country.
Mr. Chairman?
Now going to recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, unanimous consent, just for clarification. Was that in the middle of COVID, by the way?
This was last November, so I think COVID was over.
Good question.
But the elections were, maybe it had something to do with the elections.
Well, I think you'd want to be in there if there was an election. This is the middle of the week in November. I've been in newsrooms, they're actually really full during an election. But I know this newsroom was ready to attack President Trump. They were doing ads for Joe Biden. They were literally running Joe Biden ads.
Mr. Chairman?
And
Whose time is
attacking
this?
President Trump.
I would make the point that, radio free is not free. And I was just thinking about this in my office the other day, and I was like, what's the most common media in America on the radio? I think it's iHeartRadio, iHeartMedia. The entire budget for iHeartMedia across the breadth of the United States of America and the globe is $90 million.
Wow.
That's the entire breadth. For Radio Free Europe, $150 million, significantly more than all of iHeartMedia. For Radio Free Asia, $70 million. For Middle East broadcasting, $103 million. You think of all of those individually, and you compare that to iHeartMedia across America, and you look at the reach of that. I just think it's an interesting note as we point out the need to downsize the size and scope of what's going on in USAGM. I did want to do my questions right now because I wanted to touch a little bit on what Representative Perry had spoken about with that IG report, but I am very surprised that nobody touched off on this on either side of the aisle. It was just said by you in your opening remarks that there's a member of Congress targeted by somebody inside of USAGM. Does that mean you were tracking their IP address and they were emailing people or they were phone calling? How do you track that? What do you mean?
Well, you'd have to ask the Capitol Police. They're the ones, I believe, doing the investigation, and it's an active investigation. But from my understanding, somebody was calling a beloved member of Congress who's actively in Congress right now. And
Republican or Democrat?
I'm going to let you guess. With the bias you've seen at this agency, just take a wild guess.
Can you say the name of the individual that conducted this?
I think I would prefer to withhold that, and maybe we can talk away from this because I don't want to sabotage the investigation.
Will you keep us updated on it as the investigation goes on?
I will as I learn more. From what I've learned is that over the course of 2 years, I believe starting in roughly October of 2023, right up until January of 25, threatening phone calls were being made to a sitting member of Congress. And through the course of their investigation, they figured out where those calls were. I don't know how our investigators figured that out, but they have ways, and they found out that the phone calls to the sitting member of Congress, threatening calls, were coming from inside of VOA. Sadly, yes. About 1,500 people went through this shoddy vetting, which I think could have been intentionally shoddy, and because they knew there were problems. This is no fingerprints, aliases in many cases.
No FBI fingerprints or something like that.
Some of the times the FBI fingerprints were taken and not submitted. Sometimes they were not taken at all. And then they were given PIV cards, which is the access card you need to get into federal buildings and offices. It's actually a very secure way of keeping our offices and our departments and
Somebody's hired
agencies.
by America, they have a direct deposit. They have, like you said, an ID card to get into a building. If they're global media, they might have a passport to travel on behalf of the United States of America. The fact that you're saying these individuals cannot be found is a staggering statement.
Not only can they not be found, and we've asked for help with other agencies to try to track them down. We even asked the Doge guys. You know, these are young guys who have a way of kind of looking into things, and they said, "I think we can find them." They tried and tried and tried.
Did they use aliases? I mean, were these people using fake names?
Yes.
Okay.
When they come in.
Did they have social security numbers, or were they foreigners?
They're foreigners with no
on
social
visas?
security numbers, so they're given just a notional number was put in on these forms. They had forms that were not filled out. I mean, this is a massive security failure in a level that should keep you up at night.
I want to ask you one more question.
And they could be working, by the way, at other
I
agencies.
want to get to one more question before my time expired. Like you said, you were a big part of media in your prior roles. Did you ever have a TS or SCI clearance, or did you ever get to go into a SCIF as a member of the media?
No.
Thank you.